3 years ago, all media agencies of the world published breaking news. Hundreds of bodies were found on the streets of a small Ukrainian town of Bucha, near Kiev, all of them with their hands tied. Most of the Western media outlets unequivocally and squarely blamed this massacre on Russia, and Bucha since then was deliberately and consistently turned into a symbol of Ukrainian martyrdom and alleged Russian brutality. This small place has become a quasi-obligatory destination for any foreign delegation visiting Kiev. In this propaganda exercise, all the blanks, false claims and discrepancies of the official version of events were deliberately disregarded. But let's ask ourselves a simple question. Do we know what really happened in Bucha 3 years ago? Do we care about the truth? It's obvious that as far as the Kiev regime and its Western backers are concerned, they definitely don't. And they don't want the others to ask these questions too. They feel quite comfortable in the bubble of lies about Russia, which they have been consistently inflating for at least 2 decades. And since the Bucha hoax is one of the core elements of this bubble, the West is aggressively resistant to any attempts to question the Bucha narrative. I have no doubts that today in their statements our Western colleagues will label our meeting, quote, Russian propaganda and manipulation, end of quote, ignoring facts and testimonies that they will hear. That's their well-known tactics to ignore truth and uncomfortable facts. But as we all know, facts are stubborn things, and it's hard to dismiss strong evidence. Therefore, we intend to briefly revisit today the events of end of March, beginning of April 2022.
Thank you for listening to me today. My name is Adrien Bocquet. I'm a French national, and I'm a former serviceman in the French military. In March and in April 2022, I went to the Ukraine through the Polish border, and I worked with doctors and nurses to help provide care for the refugees. And let me just clarify, refugees. I did not in any way take part in the war, either on the Ukrainian or the Russian side. I simply came to assist refugees. Unfortunately, when I arrived in Ukraine, the Ukrainian army came up to us, more specifically the Azov unit. Just to spell things out, I was dealing primarily with medication, and my task was to set up kits and to bring them into Ukrainian hospitals for distribution. We were intercepted a number of times by the Ukrainian army asking for that medication when the medication was to be used for children, just for children. On a number of occasions, we came across the Azov unit of the Ukrainian army, and around the 4th of April, and I may be mistaken by 1 or 2 days, let me just say that in passing, but around the 4th of April, we were in the outskirts of Kiev, and these Azov units approached us. They came towards us, and they asked us to follow them. A number of soldiers climbed into our vehicles, and we headed towards Bucha. When we arrived in the suburbs, we were checked at a number of checkpoints, but as we were medical volunteers, we were not searched or checked because we were with Azov soldiers. So we were allowed through without our passports being checked or even our vehicles being searched. We came to the outskirts, the eastern suburbs of Bucha, and we saw vans which had corpses inside of them. And these corpses were being unloaded on the roadside and on the sidewalks. So there were individuals dressed as Ukrainian military and some dressed as civilians. So these corpses were unloaded and placed on the sidewalks and on the roads. We found that strange, but we continued on our way. And then we came to the center of Bucha, where there were in point of fact a number of trucks that had been burned out, and there were corpses here and there. Armored vehicles had been set on fire, but here again we saw refrigerator trucks. And once again, they were unloading corpses on the sidewalks and on the roads. At that point in time, let me just point out that there was no journalist in the city. The city had been completely closed by the Ukrainian military. And we went through with the Azov units. So I asked an Azov serviceman, why are these corpses being placed on the sides of the roads, and who are these people? And the answer was that these are individuals who had passed away, who had died in the northeast of Ukraine. He did not clarify where exactly. That's the answer I was given, that these are corpses that come from the northeast of Ukraine. So we continued to cross through the city of Bucha, and we stopped because the military needed to pick a few things up. And at that point in time, we witnessed, I was not alone, we all witnessed Ukrainian servicemen and civilians, the same individuals who had unloaded the corpses on the side of the road. I saw them tying the hands of these corpses with a white cloth. Let me tell you that what I'm telling you now is what I told investigators over hours and days. I told them what I had witnessed. On the white cloth, I didn't think that was a very important thing, and then I realized ultimately that it was an important fact. Let me explain why. I was shown pictures with a bag that had been found containing white cloth, and I confirmed that indeed that was the white cloth that I had seen being put on these corpses. These corpses have been authenticated by you internationally. These civilians had been killed a few days prior to these events, but a few days earlier there had been rainstorms. There was a lot of mud and soil, and these civilian corpses were covered with mud and dirt. They were quite dirty, all of them. And then I understood that something was not quite right, and that is that the white ribbons that had been put on these corpses were perfectly clean. They were brand new. And that's when I understood that, in point of fact, the hands had been tied after these individuals had been killed, and at a time when there was no storm, when there were no rainstorms. So then I understood that what I had seen was a very important event, and that it meant that the Ukrainian army had indeed tied the hands of these corpses after the Russian military had left Bucha. And even if you don't believe me, all you have to do, and I invite you to do this, all you need to do is to look at all of the reports and the pictures of these corpses with their hands tied. Look at the state of the of the corpses, of their clothing, and then look at the white ribbons and the color of those ribbons. How is it possible for a corpse to be covered in mud and then to have these white ribbons that are perfectly clean? So I understood at that point in time that there was a problem. Unfortunately, we continued through Bucha. We arrived at a warehouse and we unloaded our medication, and then these vans, these trucks arrived, and Russian prisoners got off these trucks. And we were told to hurry up and to leave. Some 50 meters away from us, I heard in Russian someone asking, "Who are the officers?" Officer. And a Russian serviceman responded that he was an officer and he was set aside. And then 3 Russian prisoners were shot in the knees. And then the Azov servicemen asked me to leave immediately, and I realized that I was witnessing something I shouldn't be witnessing. And so we left quickly. And as we left, I turned around, as did my colleague, a nurse, and we saw an Azov military man execute the officer with a bullet to the head. So I understood that I had just witnessed a war crime. And with my volunteer colleagues, we agreed to leave Bucha as quickly as possible because we were quite afraid. We were afraid for our lives. I will conclude by saying thank you for having listened to me. I have nothing to win in any of this. I've lost everything. I lost my family. I've lost my job. I've lost my house. I can't go out into the streets. I have to stay hidden, and I'm afraid that someone will kill me, will try to kill me. That's how much my life has changed. But I want this war to end. It must end. I can no longer watch civilians die in this war. The war must end.